So this is such a nice dovetail. That session is like the perfect dovetail into this session, which is another key topic, related but key, and it's been really a cornerstone of this event and this group. Last year, I think Maria brought up, we had a session that Kate fondly called "Is the Role of the CMO Black Hole?" which got everyone really happy. But it was a great discussion, and it led to this rise of the Chief Market Officer. And so I'm going to say no more, and I'm going to let the experts, Kate Bullis and Christine Heckard, come up here and rock this session about the rise of the Chief Market Officer.
Thank you, Lat. Hi, Christine. So everyone, we could not be more delighted to be here and speaking with all of you again. For those of you who have been with us for 3 years or 2 years in running, you're very familiar with my face and Christine's. And you're also probably pretty familiar with the fact that we're pretty passionate about the topic of the Chief Market Officer. I can say with a very honest heart that it was actually Christine Heckard who really sparked the first idea for me on this subject. And I have been an advocate and a champion for Chief Market Officer ever since. So in the spirit of today's event, both self-empowerment and empowering others, Christine and I thought it would be a nice idea to, instead of introducing ourselves to you, introduce one another. And again, do that in the spirit of holding each other up, as we all hope that you're doing with one another today and forevermore after today. So here I am introducing to you Christine Heckard, for those of you who do not know Christine. Christine is a technologist. She's a marketer, an operator, and a GM. She is a board member. She's a mother and a wife, and without a doubt, maybe more than all of those things, she's a friend. She's a friend to so many of us here, but especially me. And she's an inspiration. And I think it's very important that on the professional side, you know that she's a 4-time CMO. She has served companies such as Juniper and NetApp and Microsoft and Cisco Systems and Brocade, and now she is a CEO. And as I said, she is a great inspiration, and it's a great pleasure to be with her on this session.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Kate. And there's a saying that success is about who you know, and even more importantly, it's about who knows you. And Kate is a who's who in the GTM space. So if you don't know her, and more importantly, if she doesn't know you, then you've got a big opportunity in front of you. Kate is my soul sister. She is also one of the people I admire most in the world, not just as a leader, and she's a great leader, but also as a human being. She is the co-founder and the head of the sales and marketing practice at SIBA International. Kate has created enormous problems for me in the past, because every time I went to build a team and I would ask her to help me find the best talent for some critical position, she would bring me 3 or more people, all of whom I wanted to say yes to. And in one case, I did say yes to all 3 of the positions that she brought. But more importantly, even than that, Kate has been my secret weapon for 10 years. And if you're a CMO and she's not your secret weapon, again, it is a huge opportunity for you, because she's a sounding board. She knows talent, she knows strategy, she knows your CEOs and how they think, because that's who she works with all the time. So as you think about this next session, how to be a Chief Market Officer, or anything else you've learned through this session, think about Kate. And as you wrap this beautiful scarf around you that she gave us all, every time you put it around you, you are wrapping Kate and her love and support around you.
Wow. Okay, that is enough. Nobody wants to hear any more about me. Thank you very much, Christine. Um, why are we here? For those of you who were with us last year, as Latney said, we did talk about the Chief Market Officer last year. But I really do feel, and so does Christine, I think, that it's gone from the conversation about Chief Market Officer has gone from being a bit of a manifesto to actually becoming realized. And what Christine and I want to talk about today is not just about the title Chief Market Officer and how we should all perhaps rush to going to market as Chief Market Officers and insisting we actually have that title. Instead, we want you to think about what the Chief Market Officer means, how that translates into the way you show up on behalf of your company and on behalf of your market, and how that ultimately will also translate into the POW of your career and hopefully your happiness. So before we start talking about Chief Marketing Officer versus Chief Market Officer, we thought we'd do a little state of the state, and I thought I'd share with you some stats. Some of these might sound familiar, some maybe not. What are some of the issues with Chief Marketing Officers? And by the way, we are going to refer this entire this whole session around B2B CMOs specifically. So first stat. 80% of CEOs don't trust or are unimpressed with their CMO, in comparison with just 10% of those same CEOs. We don't need these slides yet, sorry. Those same CEOs who said they don't trust or are unimpressed with their CMO said that about their CIO or their CFO only 10% of the time. That was from a study done by Fournet's marketing group. Another stat, and this one's about underutilization. According to Harvard Business Review, 74% of CMOs believe their jobs don't allow them to maximize their impact on the business. 74%. Next stat, this one's about turnover. I know you all know this, but even though the tenure of a CMO has increased over time from say 24 months to 36 months to now it's pushing closer to 4 years, the CMO is still the C-suite position that turns over the most often, still. The next one is like CIO, and that's more like 4.5 years. And then CFO is 5, and CEO is more like 8. Next stat, turnover. I'm sorry. The next stat is about not being at the table. And this is actually just based on knowledge that my team and I have put together, given all of the search work that we do here in the Bay Area with enterprise technology companies. When we looked at 20 of the largest West Coast enterprise technology companies, all publicly traded, 9 of the 20 have CMOs that do not report to the CEO. And then there's just all of this information, both anecdotal and in statistics and studies, that show how much confusion there is about what a CMO is and what a CMO should be responsible for. That confusion is taking place on the part of the CMO, him or herself. That is definitely happening in the CEO's office, and it's absolutely happening in the peers and in the boardroom. And we see it as a search firm every day, the lack of understanding of a definition, the lack of anything that's a standard. And we ask ourselves, why? Why is this? And there's obviously a number of reasons. One is that the CMO function itself has evolved so rapidly. If we just 5 years, sure, 10 years, definitely. And that is because of technology and digitization and consumerization. And because the chief marketing officer is always about the customer, the marketing department is always evolving with the market. And so by default, the marketing team and the CMO will always be changing and always be evolving. But digitization also makes that happen faster and faster. Finally, I would say that the reason we see so much confusion when it comes to the role and the ownership is because we've got issues in the boardroom and expectations that were from 10 years ago that just haven't evolved. So all of this is to say, we're in a place that says we're in trouble. Some days it's better than others. But before we go into what we want to do about it, Christine, would you talk a little bit about some history and how we got here?
Yeah. So first of all the discussion in the chat room is really valuable. I want to, in educating you on the history, let's make sure the whole point of this education is not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And I can tell you honestly, this is not about a title. This is not about a title change. A title change will help reflect the reality of the change that we're trying to make here, which is about a responsibility change and a skill set change. Some of you have the ability to have the innate ability in yourself to be a CMO, a chief market officer. Some of you do not, and some of you have it, but you're not doing it yet. If you do not have the innate capability or you are not doing it yet, do not become a chief market officer, because you will make it harder and worse for everybody. When we set up the CMO title, we were way too focused on the title. It was 20 years ago. We were all VPs of marketing. A handful of us were like, well, this is shit. Everybody else has a C title. Why can't we have a C title? So we went out to get a C title. And a couple of years later, we all had C titles. We never addressed the responsibilities, the definition of the role, and the capabilities that you need in the office. And it's not that they're going to be exactly the same in every company, but they need to be thought of in a different way than we are now. And as Janice was saying in the chat, we don't put an ing on anything else. So why do we put an ing on market? And what happens is we are too focused on the ing, which is all of the activities. And by the way, those are necessary. They're not bad. You have to ing. That's how you get shit done. But it is not the point. The point is the market. And this is about crystallizing the role and the responsibilities of what you do and the necessary, the ing, but not sufficient, the market. You have to go after the market. You have to shape the market, change beliefs and behaviors, create that market in your company's image and after its likeness. That's what you're doing. Who's the market? How do we get them? How do we change what they think about, what they believe? How do we lead them to a new and better way? That's what you're doing as the chief market officer. And it comes out of your essence and your purpose and all the things that we were talking about before on category, that you should be side by side with the CEO, helping him or her to lead. That's what a chief market officer is. So this is all going to be about how we move in that direction. But keep in mind, it's way more important that you live the role than that you get rid of the ing in your title. And you want those two things, when they happen, to go together.
Right. Yeah. So again, there are many women. Latney is a great example. Janice is a great example. JJ is a great example. All these folks have actually changed their titles. And Christine and I love that. And we hope you do. I mean, I want to live in a world where CEOs don't have searches for chief marketing officers anymore. I want to educate every CEO and every board that, as many in the chat room have already pointed out, we don't call it the chief selling officer. We don't call it the chief financing officer. Why do we call it the chief marketing officer? The title alone suggests that all we do is activity and we are not about the strategy. there are three things that make up every company. Without these three things, you don't have a company. And those things are the product, the channel to get that product out the door and into the hands of the customer, and that's sales, and the market itself. Without a market, there is no company. Who's responsible for the market? And that is the Chief Market Officer. All of you already are. It's just that your title suggests that you're less than that. And so what we're trying to do is elevate and clarify for once and for all the idea of what the marketing department is, how strategic it is to the business, how absolutely critical it is. Otherwise, you don't even have a company.
Well, and Kate, one thing you just said is, all of you already are. I'm not sure that's true. And, one of the things we're going to do next is show you the data. You aren't all that yet. Some of you absolutely are, and some of you absolutely can be. And then some of you may not want to be, and that's all right as well. Like this doesn't have to be your destination, but if it is your destination, we want to help you get from here to there.
So one of the things we thought we would do in order to demonstrate the point, in order to separate out what's market versus marketing. First there's strategy, then there's activity. We thought, let's take a look at some of the survey results from the survey that we all took when we registered for this event, you might remember. We're not going to look at all the survey questions because that wouldn't necessarily apply. But if we go to our first slide, one of the first questions that was asked in the survey was, how do you spend your time? As a CMO, what are you doing with your time? Christine and I separated out the answers into three buckets, three categories. Some of them fit into what we would consider to be the market bucket. And then if you go all the way to the right, that's your ing bucket. That's your action. That's your activity, thanks to the market. And then the stuff in the middle is a little fuzzy. So Christine, do you want to start and share just a couple of comments about what we see here?
Yeah, I mean, anything that is something like company vision and strategy, and it got put here because it was company, not, product vision and strategy, not something less. But if you're doing company vision and strategy, if you're doing thought leadership, if you are helping to innovate on what products the company should be developing and how those products should be changing to capture markets, and if you are truly understanding the market itself, and how to shape it, et cetera. Those are all market. When you're listing things like storytelling or lead generation or super important, all of that stuff, that's the ing. And then there's a bunch of stuff in between that's a little bit hard to classify because it's probably a bit of both.
Right. I think it's really important, again, for us just to say, none of these things are bad. We recognize that you have to spend your time on all of these things. Just we're hoping to call to your attention how to separate these things out. And then maybe everyone can begin to see, I want to spend 75, 80% of my time on the market, 20% of my time on the ing. I've got a team to do the ing. I do the market, right? And make sure your CEO and your peers see you as representative of that market, and of course your board. And the tweener stuff, Christine, do we want to call that out a little bit? We want to make sure that, because some of the answers that we received on the survey were places where Christine and I said, depends on what the person meant when we put that down.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
if you're
Christine.
in front of the board and you're presenting on the market, your market. If you're presenting on the ing, that'll speak for itself. If you're doing corp dev,
if all you're talking about is, if you're talking about, CAC and your KPIs, that's just your ing, right? We've got, we're really telling what the market is, leading in the market, creating the market, all the things that were talked about earlier today on category, as well as some of the things that were discussed when we talked about getting onto boards. Nora said in the breakout session that I was a part of that all boards look for three things: strategy acumen, business acumen, and financial acumen. And even though all boards are increasingly wanting to see marketers in the room, if you don't have those three things, you're not invited into the room. And so that's the kind of thing you have to think about more often than the aim. And we can talk more about some of these tweener things as well, but it's important to make the distinctions.
Yeah, and there's questions. Several of you have questions in the chat around go-to-market. Go-to-market is typically both. There's a lot of ing in go-to-market. There's no doubt about it. And if you're the one saying, well, what market are we going to? And how are we leading that market, as well as shaping it and capturing it, then you're doing stuff that is market. If you are just following, if you are a sales support function, you are ing. So let's look at their superpowers, Kate.
All right, on to the next. I want to hit alignment.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, how our jobs changed.
Okay, so this was the second question. And that was, how has your job changed just inside of 2020? Obviously, a lot has changed because of the year. And so this was an interesting ask. And we found some really interesting results. Maybe not surprising, but we'd love to see a little bit more of a shift. 20% of the answers were all what we would consider to be really market changing things. 10% tweener, and 70% of the responses fell into what we would call the activity bucket. And again, it doesn't make it bad. It's just something that we should all be aware of, right? Is that by design? Could we be being more impactful on our businesses, struggling as they might be, thanks to the pandemic and other things, if we were shifting more of our attention to the market versus the activity?
Yep.
Christine, any specific comments on this one?
Yeah, Kate and I read through every one of your answers, your handwritten answers to this and the other questions, and there were some moments that were absolutely uplifting. Some of you talked about, I am more involved in company vision and strategy. I am doing thought leadership. One of you specifically said, I'm doing revenue growth versus leads. That is your direct statement. I'm more focused on the market and the customer versus leads. Those are your exact words. And then there were a whole bunch of you who talked about virtual events. Now, it is true your job has changed that way. I hope that is not your definition of success, to do a virtual event versus a physical event. You know, I get that that's a big change. A lot of you have become very, very internally focused. You're much more focused across the company, inside, maybe doing diversity. Again, that's not bad. All of those internal things and getting internal alignment is great. But if it takes away from your ability to focus on the market, and if you're not doing it in order to bring those things together, then the movements that you are making this year are not taking you closer towards the destination of a chief market officer, if that is your desired destination.
All right, last slide. Superpowers, our favorite. So this one again, what's your superpower? And there were a lot, if I remember correctly, this was very much a blank slate. You name it, name your superpower, not here are your 10 choices to select. And so this was really interesting for Christine and me, because we're literally lifting specific answers straight from these surveys. And these are the summary, right? This represents the majority of the answers. If there were a couple of things that we could bucket in together, we just clumped them all into one, sentence. But look at some of these results. 15% of the superpower answers were what we consider to be market, whereas 55% were what we consider to be activity, actions, what happens after you're doing strategy and vision. So again, one that keeps coming up, if we look to the right on the AIM, marketing and sales alignment. Alignment, collaboration, bridge builder, relationships, those were all the same words for the all different words for the same thing. I'm really starting to wonder, by the way, especially after the category conversation, if it really should be the CMO that's doing the aligning and not the CEO. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the CMO being expected to be the one to do all the aligning. I think the market should be the one that's aligning us all. And if the chief market officer is representative of that, fine. But it shouldn't be that everybody's waiting around for the CMO to align us all. It should be with the CEO enough. Christine, any other comments here on this particular slide?
Yeah, a lot of your superpowers enable you to be a chief market officer if you want to. You may or may not be putting them to work that way. So for those of you who said that you're leading categories, that you're the chief visionary, that you're synthesizing data across the business, I pulled that one specifically because of those last words. Whoever said foresight, I put it in here as long as it's foresight on the market itself. Hallelujah, you are putting your superpowers to work as a chief market officer. Some of you, the answers were tweeners. So if you just said, I'm great at data, I don't know what that means. You're great at hitting pain points, again, might be in service to the market, might be something else. Synthesizing sounds like a bridge builder. Executive whisperer, that one made me a little bit worried. Could be a great superpower to have, but like, why aren't, it's good that you have the ability to influence and your ego's obviously not getting in the way, but why don't you have the courage to stand up and make the change? Maybe there's a good reason for that. I'm not calling you out. It's just, these are things to think about. Being a change agent, fabulous. If it's changing to market-driven stuff, if it's just activity stuff, not so much. But the ings, some of these ings like really could turn into market superpowers. Comms and storytelling was a common one. If you are just busy telling your company's story, that's a chief PR person. Storytelling is a really great superpower to have. If you can put that superpower to work, convincing a market to believe and behave differently, shaping a market into your image and after your likeness, that is a chief market officer. So some of these, you can kind of look at them and say, okay, how do I take the ing, making complex things simple? That's one of my superpowers is oversimplification. I don't consider it my main one, but if you can use that to influence a market, capture a market, identify a market, that's a great market superpower. So again, not good or bad, these go in different places, but think about how you can take your superpower and then put it to work towards this destination.
All right. So the last thing Christine and I wanted to do was to ask for another example from among you that is very representative of what we're talking about here, the shift from focusing on the aim to really representing and embodying the chief market officer. So we asked for Kimberly Storin to join us. Kimberly, if you could join on, Kimberly's story is just so great. And we thought, Kimberly, could you share a little bit about your story over the last year and what makes you a chief market officer now?
Absolutely. So last year was really this huge moment of enlightenment for me around this conversation. And I had, I really came to terms with an issue that I've had my entire career, which is that I never really knew where I fit in. And I started out in crisis PR, went and got an MBA, spent 5 years in M&A consulting at Deloitte, so top tier management strategy firm, decided to move into industry and kind of floated around between marketing and strategy, still kind of straddling M&A and also, within the marketing function. And Dave Johnson, who was the SVP at Dell back in 2011, pulled me aside. He was one of my mentors and said, "You're just not finance enough oriented. You've got an MBA, but you're not a finance person. Like, marketing needs you." And I never really knew what that meant, but it always kind of stayed in the back of my head as I was making career decisions. And I knew that I liked to solve problems. I knew that I was a strategist at heart. My favorite work has always been leading transformations, big brand transformations at AMD, turning around AMD, like look where it is now. I had a $2 share price when we started, if you can imagine that. And then growing an emerging business within a stagnant business at IBM. And I really loved these big business strategy problems, but I was in this function of marketing, and I felt like I was too curious, too market oriented. I felt like I was always overstepping my boundaries. I was biting off more than I could chew, just because of the narrowness of the marketing function. And I was constantly kind of pushing my peers to think differently. And what I uncovered last year is like, the reason why is that I was being boxed into this marketing, right? The ING, but I was focused on market. And so this was a really eye-opening experience. At the same time that I was joining you guys in Napa, I was also interviewing for a few other CMO jobs at smaller companies. And I ended up choosing a job that I never would have thought that I would choose, because the CEO, well, first of all, had seen Kate and JJ present at the Play Bigger conference. And so in our first meeting, he said, I want a chief market officer. And I was like, oh, okay. So the heavy lift has been done, because all of the other CEOs that I was talking to and negotiating with really just cared about the ING. And I just I could not get there. I was not excited. I was not passionate. And so what I realized is that I was feeling too limited in the way that those functions were defined. And so finding a CEO who embraced this idea of a chief market officer, who does enable me and empower me to lead strategy across the corporation, to be able to represent that view to our board, and to really challenge the status quo. Yes, I'm still doing ING. We're a startup, right? So we're still doing it. But is that where I spend the majority of my brain power? No, I've hired a great team that can go do that work. And instead, I'm getting to spend 70% of my time now focused on the market versus that flip-flop of where I felt before. And so I just have to say thank you to Christine and to Kate and JJ and the others that I talked to last year at this conference, who were really the ones who basically said, it's okay that you feel like you don't fit in. You're having this existential crisis, because there was a reason why. Like, my skills and my passion were not necessarily aligned to the ING. So I just have to say, I ran a CMO roundtable this morning for Great Point Ventures with Ray Lane, who is the key investor, who I think you guys probably all know. And so in introducing Ray and him giving us a few words, he said, I wrote it down, that more than any other C-suite function, the CMO has to think like a CEO. And he challenged us all to be a CEO. And it was just really powerful to hear Ray, who has, he's worked with Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison, and turned around Oracle in the 90s. Like, he knows what a marketing leader should look like. And for him to give us that power, and to tell us all in the room today to go be the CEO, was really, really empowering. So I think it just tied really nicely in, and I'm sure he won't mind that I just used his quote. But
he gave him his attribution. And hallelujah, please, this is what we're trying to do, spread the word. But it has to start with us, right? Mm-hmm. We can hope that the CEO will get it, and we can hope that our peers will get it, and the boardroom will get it, but it has to start with CMOs themselves. We have to walk the earth thinking this way about ourselves, thinking this way about what we will deliver and how we will behave and what the world should expect. And then we will standardize at last.
Yeah.
So we kind of started off talking about power this morning, right, with Patty Sellers. And this is a way that we can take control. We can take the power that I think we all need. And I think, Kim, I loved when you said the word overstep, because a lot of the comments and stuff were, and I get it, but people saying, well, somebody else already thinks they're doing that, and there's this role and that role. And sometimes I think you just got to go and overstep and do it and stick your nose in stuff. And people, it just make it happen. And so I love that word. I think that's a great word for us all to think about.